Augusta Church, Happy New Year to you. It is now officially 2023, which it says on the slide because I quadruple checked it. Are we dismissing kids to class today? Are we doing that? I'm here to dismiss kids to class. You're still going to hear somebody talk about the Bible. It's just not going to be me. You know, it's funny, in our society and culture today, we have these repeating patterns, and one of them is that when the new year comes around and the way that we sort of celebrate it on the calendar and everything, that people use that as a time of reflection and for setting New Year's resolutions. Here's how this year is going to be different. Here are the things, and basically that's another way to say goals. And for a long time, and there's nothing magical or scriptural about specifically setting them at the beginning of a year. But for a long time, because something I've noticed about myself is I'm really averse to things that are cliche. Like they bug me. People leaning into stereotypes bugs me. Stuff like that. So when something becomes that repetitive, and it's just sort of this cultural expectation, I could very easily, and did for a very long time, roll my eyes about it. I'm like, this is silly. It's so useless that it becomes sort of a running joke in every sitcom that you've ever seen, and we all talk about how the gyms all get rich in January, and then it falls off. But as I've gotten a little older and hopefully a little wiser, or at least a little, the thing that's become clear to me is, and you might want to mark this down because unfortunately this is not something that you hear preachers say a lot, I was wrong. Whether or not you do it in the beginning of a year is irrelevant, but the idea of setting goals, of looking at where you want to go and sort of painting a target and aiming for it, just in terms of human development, in terms of spiritual development, everything else, of course, obviously, that makes sense to do, to define things and to say, here's the path that I want to take, or here's the destination I want to wind up at. How do we chart a path to that? How do I get from here to there? Okay, so I'm going to use the opportunity to talk about that kind of thing because, yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's a great recurring opportunity where you can stop and reevaluate, and there's a certain sense to that. But whether you do it right now or whether you do it at another point because something happens and makes you think about it, it's something that you're going to have to do if you're going to make progress. Like even, you've heard me talk a lot about how God poses himself as the potter and we're the clay. And so most of the transformation that actually takes place is us allowing God to do what God wanted to do anyway, right? Because God won't overpower you, won't force you. But even that, your ability to be open for it still requires some sort of planning and some sort of charting a course, because you've got to get out of habits that are in the way of that. You've got to build in other habits that put you in a position to receive, I guess is the best way that I could say that. And there's this, again, maybe it's because we're so exposed to it, maybe it's because of the repetition of it every year, but there's this cynicism that creeps in, and we feel so smart and superior about it. We're cynical about these fools who make the resolutions that they never follow through on, and I know the feeling well. But here's the thing about cynicism. Actually, in his book, The Myth of Certainty, an author named Daniel Taylor, I think, said it really well. He said, cynicism may seem an intelligent position given the hypocrisy and stupidity of so many human endeavors. Cynics often pride themselves on their greater insight into human nature and society, fancying that they see through sham and pretension that fool everyone else. Ultimately, however, cynicism is both foolish and cowardly itself. It's foolish because it underestimates the God-given human potential for finding and creating meaning in life, and it's cowardly because it is afraid to risk anything in the human adventure. We live in a culture that's becoming more and more resistant to commitments of just about any kind. We want to hold out and see what our options are. We want to hold out and see if something better comes up. We're usually smart enough not to say that out loud. But we want to keep all our options open. We don't want to say yes definitely to anything because we don't know what else is going to happen. And if we commit, then we're locked in on that. And let me be real clear. That statement in and of itself is not wrong. If you commit, you're locked in on that. I'll change the tone in my voice to make a different point, but it's true. That is commitment. But here's just a simple truth. Life does not consist of just making decisions between right and wrong. That does enter into it. But life, and certainly a meaningful life, and a life of growth, and a life that goes forward, means you deciding what you're going to say yes to. What good things are you going to say yes to? Because saying yes to those good things necessarily means you saying no to bad things, sure, but that's sort of like kindergarten. You saying yes to good things, or to the best things, if you want to evaluate them that way, means you saying no to other perfectly good things that there's nothing wrong with. And this comes from a bunch of different places. Some of it is that I just want to keep my options open. Some of it is, and this is tough because some of us have this people-pleasing urge in us. And sometimes that's just in certain contexts, but it's there. Some of us do not have that. But some of us have this people-pleasing impulse, and what it causes us to do, in some ways, is to overcommit. We overpromise. Because we don't want to disappoint. But here's the thing, when you're only wired for so much. There's only so much of you. So you have to decide what good things, what best things, what important things you're going to say yes to. And when you do, that's a commitment that means you're saying no, even if it's just for now, to other perfectly good things because you can't do all of it. Let me rephrase. You can't do all of it well. You are, in a very practical sense, a limited commodity. You have so much life, you have so much time, and you have to make decisions about what you're going to do with it, what you're going to commit it to, or it will evaporate on you. And none of the places that you vaguely wanted to go will you end up. Look, my wife has a sense of direction. You could drop her in the desert, and I'm convinced that she would find her way out. You drop me in my neighborhood, I'm not sure I could find my way out without a GPS. I would not, if I did, I had one of those, you remember before everybody had smartphones and everything, you buy the little Garmin thing that had the antenna that folded up and a green screen, it just beeped at you? Yeah, I had one. I would not have a master's degree without it. I would not have ever found the school in Nashville. It would have never happened. I do not have a sense of direction. I don't know what you guys did. I do kind of know what you did. I don't know what you did before we had MapQuest, where you would enter in that was revolutionary. You would enter in the address you were going and print out these pages so you're driving with like a stack of 20 pages, flipping through it. I don't think you were supposed to, but we did. And then when it's on your phone, it actually tells you. And it tells you sometimes in Mr. T's voice if you choose that option, which is very confusing. It made my dad a nervous wreck when I went somewhere with him. It's like, you missed a turn, fool. It was great, but my dad was a nervous wreck. Now, we went down to the Bahamas after Christmas. We don't do gifts anymore. We do experiences, so that was kind of our gift to each other. And so we spent a few days in the Bahamas on a cruise ship. Nice way to break up that awful, awful cold, to go right down to the Bahamas. But it was at Port Canaveral. It's down in Orlando. And if I didn't have my phone plugged into the radio telling me where to turn and where to go, if I just said, you know what, I'm just going to start driving, I suppose there's technically a statistical chance I would have wound up there. But it's not high. Right? If Dana was driving, we probably would have still wound up there. But in general, I'm not going to find it without some guidance, without charting out a path to get there. The idea that we would arrive at these places, that we would arrive at the kind of growth that we want, and it's just going to happen accidentally. Let me go this far. The idea that if you just figure out how to stay out of trouble, you're going to grow in positive ways is ridiculous. The idea that if you just don't get into trouble, if you just figure out how to restrict yourself so you just don't get into trouble, and then maybe spiritual growth will happen, is ridiculous. I mean, don't get into trouble. That's important too. Not that kind of trouble. But that doesn't equal that. You have to make decisions. You have to make choices. You have to have commitment. There's a school of thought in psychology and sociology that says that your identity is made up of your commitments, and if you don't have them, you don't have much of an identity. I heard Tony Campolo speaking one time, and he said this, and I never quite got it out of my head. He was talking about our culture where we're all so busy and we all like to tell people how busy we are, and we say, hey, how you doing? And we like to go on about how busy we are to impress them. And he said, if you're too busy, then maybe you're undercommitted. Let me say that again. If you're too busy, maybe you're undercommitted. See, because if you say yes to those important things, then you don't get bogged down in the other stuff because you said yes to this. Maybe the reason that you're able to be pulled in so many directions is because you haven't set a course. And so every turn, every opportunity, every possible path seems equally valid. And I guess maybe in some ways some of them are, until you make choices, but those choices are what matter, and those choices are the reason that you get anywhere. If you'd like to follow along in the YouVersion Bible app on your phone, tablet, or whatever you have it on, you can. The notes are there. There's also a giving link at the end if you want to use that online. Turn, if you will, to Joshua chapter 24, verse 15, or you can look at it in that app. I'll remind you that the way that Joshua winds up in charge of the Israelites in the desert, in the wilderness, is that the Israelites have been enslaved, and then they pray for years and years and generations, and eventually God sends Moses to deliver them, and he leads them out, and there's all the pillar of fire and pillar of cloud and the sea splits, and then they wander out in the desert. They actually make pretty decent time, all things considered. They wind up at the Promised Land. They send in some spies. Two of them come back saying, man, this is amazing. We could take them. God's on our side. We could take them. And then all the other spies come back and say, man, we're like grasshoppers, those people. They would stomp us. It's a paraphrase, but it's pretty accurate. And so the Israelites, somewhat by their own choice, end up wandering around in the desert until all of them die out that were there to make that decision, except for the two that went in and said, yeah, I think God's got this. So you have this younger nation of Israel with these two crazy old coots that kind of go into the Promised Land. But Joshua's one of them. Joshua's one of the spies who said, no, I think God can do this. He winds up in charge of the whole deal. And as they're about to go into the Promised Land finally, he calls everybody together, and then he makes a commitment before them before he asks them to make it. Here's what he says. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, that's the kind of commitment that we're talking about, and it's also the kind of commitment that we're increasingly reluctant to make. You say, wait, what are you talking about? We're here. We're not sleeping in. It would be a great day to sleep in. But we're here. Obviously, we're committed to the Lord. It's a great illustration of commitment for this reason. He looks out at them and says, hey, here's what I'm going to do. And I'm set on it. I'm committed to it. And I'm committed to it independent of what the rest of you decide to do. I'm committed to it in a way that isn't swayed. We're not polling opinions. We're not seeing which way the wind blows. I've made a decision. For me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. If something else seems more desirable to you, if you've looked out, you've seen the options, and you say, hey, this one seems more my speed, then own it. Own the decision. If you say, you know what? That God was great when I was a kid and needed some stuff to do, but I think I'm going to run my own life like I'm God now. Knock yourself out, Skippy. See how that goes for you. But don't try to keep a foot in each place. Don't try to half do it. God actually has quite a bit to say about people who are lukewarm in their decisions. It's not positive. Choose for this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord no matter what you do. I think it's better. I think it's true. I think it's right. I think it's beautiful. But it's what I'm committed to regardless of what you do. And it's not just that. It's not just whether or not you're in on God. I'm going to love my wife no matter what the rest of you do. I'm going to love my kids no matter what the rest of you do. I want you to do those things too, but whether or not you do it is irrelevant to whether or not I do it. And I bring this up, and I'm using pretty easy examples, but it's fascinating to me that when you get in conversations with Christians, sometimes you wind up in a place where you start talking about the things that we should all be doing, that the Bible's clear, and ways that we need to grow, things that we need to do, ways that we need to use our time and resources and money and everything else. And you wind up getting a response like, I'm already doing this. If everybody else ups their game, then maybe I would too. And every time I hear that, well, actually, this is the second place that my head goes. The first place my head goes is when Jesus is walking on the beach with Peter. And he's talking about Peter, about where his life's going to go and even the kind of death he's going to die and everything. And Peter looks back and sees John just kind of following him, pretending like he's not paying attention, but they're on a beach. Where else is he going? And Peter says, well, what about that guy? I mean, you're saying all this is going to happen to me. What about that guy? And Jesus says, what does that have to do with you? I called you to do this. Look, whataboutism is pretty stupid in any argument. You're in politics all the time right now where somebody in somebody's own party does something ridiculous, bad, corrupt, and their response, instead of saying, hey, you know what, I believe in these ideals, but that really was corrupt and bad, and we got to call him on that. They instead say, well, what about, and then they'll point to the other party and some person in that. Well, what about that? They're both wrong. That doesn't make it okay. Somebody else doing something bad doesn't make your bad okay. Still bad. If you want to have any integrity to talk about it, you got to call it out on your own side. Or else you're just a shill. You're just the person the con artist does to make their story seem believable. Commitment in many ways is a matter of integrity. Do you hold to this? Do you hold to these values? Do you hold to these paths, regardless of what anybody else does? Because that's commitment. I think it was Jon Stewart, of all people, I heard one time on The Daily Show back when he did that, where he was talking about, what I liked about him is he owned his bias. He let you know kind of where he landed. But he said, but we're not here to push my agenda. We make fun of things like corruption and incompetence, and there's plenty of that to go around on both sides of the aisle. That's why they had a show. But I heard him one time, he was covering something in Congress where they're all just like the Keystone Cops about something. And he said, guys, if you don't hold to your values when it gets hard, then those aren't values. Those are hobbies. Are you committed to the way of Jesus? Are you committed to these values? Then you do them when they're hard, not just when they're easy and kind of happen anyway. Those are nice hobbies to have if you do that, but we're talking about commitment and values and faith, living a life that matters. So the question becomes, what do you finally need to commit to and move towards with intention and grit? Because it's not like you just flip a switch in your head and say, I'm committed to this, and then it's not hard because you committed to it. No, it'll be very hard because you committed to it. There'll be all kinds of things that pull for your attention and your time and everything else. For some of us, it's something that we need to tame or cut out. This is the part where I meddle. Look, you guys have known me for a while. You know that I don't think that I've looked at it for a very long time. The Bible, I don't believe that the Bible calls us to all have a teetotaler position when it comes to alcohol. I don't believe that early Christians would know what you were talking about. Partially because their culture just couldn't accommodate that. So that's not where I'm coming from. But some of us need to reevaluate our relationship with alcohol. That's not a blanket, iron-fisted, this is a sin for any. I don't think you make that case from the Bible. I do think you can make the case for knowing yourself, knowing your own weaknesses, and having personal convictions that aren't bound on somebody else because it's what's best for you. Because we're all different people with different histories and different things that pull at us. We have different temptations that matter. So for some of us, you may need to say, and I know people in this room who have had to make this decision. They made a commitment, and it's hard. I don't want this in my life anymore. I don't like what it's doing. And so they cut it out. And that's the right decision for them. For other people, they look at it and say, you know what, this is not taking me where I want it to be, so this is getting a little out of control. I didn't realize it. We're in a pandemic, stuff just happened. And so you decide to tame it back, and so you put some measures in place, not expecting it to just happen on its own. And some of you, it's not a question you need to wrestle with at all. But if you don't want to, it might be a sign that you need to. If it makes you a little mad that I brought it up, you might want to consider it. For some of us, it's how much you've been sucked into your social media. It's easy to do, man. They've done all kinds of studies that actually compare the impulse to grab your phone and look at it and go back into it. It's similar levels to heroin addiction. It's hard. For some of us, it's how we keep getting sucked into partisan politics and playing it out like a team sport, burning relationships to the ground for something that, if we're honest, most of the time we don't even know what we're talking about. I mean, sure, you saw a lot of people say it on Facebook, or they at least reposted that picture with print on it. By the way, do you know how they do pictures with print on it for those memes? The reason that they do is because the algorithms that they have to catch things and to sort of fact check them can't read print on pictures yet. That's how they skip it. Almost everything that comes out of those Russian hacker things where they're putting stuff out to sort of sow discord and that kind of thing, which is a proven thing, it's always those pictures with the text in the picture because they can't search it. That's for free. That's not in the notes. For some of us, it's something that we finally need to develop as a matter of good character and spiritual growth. For a lot of us, it's listening, learning to listen. For a lot of us, it's cultivating gratitude because it's very, very easy to get cynical and entitled. Some of us is building emotional intelligence, patience, compassion. Get one other person to this church. I'm going to have all kind of microphones on me. This year, if everybody in this church decided to look around at the people they're connected to and get one other person to this church, here's the math portion. The size of the church would double in a year. Math. Don't like that one. If every family in this church got another family to come and be a part of it, the size of the church would double in a year. This is the end of the math portion of the sermon because I'm no longer confident about anything else I do. Like double, everybody plus one doubles, I got that. It's that simple. If you decided to do that and you had a year to look through your friends to see who you think could really use something like this. I'm not talking about poaching from other churches or anything. I'm just saying you got people in your life. And if there's something true and beautiful and wonderful here that you think could help them, if you and I would get around to telling them about it and inviting them, the thing that's been beautiful and true and wonderful, complicated and messy, absolutely, but true and beautiful, and it's pulled us along, even though sometimes it's hard, if you think that it could do that for them too, church is doubled in a year. Resources are doubled in a year. It's not a complicated plan. Step one, get somebody else to come. Step two, oh look, whole plan. Oh, you know what? I'll add a step for you. Church people like three things. Start every day by praying for God to reveal to you the person that He wants to bring into this church that's in your life, and then expect Him to do that because, frankly, He wants that more than you do. Commit to that. See what happens. So far, I've committed you to, I haven't committed you, you have to make the decision. Compulsory commitments are useless. But I've committed you to 30-second prayer, give or take, in the morning. And how to put this? Talking to a person in the next year. Now, you want to do more of that? You want to do more with it? Knock yourself out, man. That'd be great. But you do that. I mean, that level, that low level, church is doubled in a year. You add praying to God about it, I feel pretty confident because God wants that more than you do. You know what? I think that'll preach by itself today. There's like a bunch more slides. I'm not even going to do them. New year. Really, that's what I want you to think about. You love God. That's why you're here. You love each other. That's why you're here. You believe in this. You believe in God's promises. You believe the story goes where God says it's going to go. So believing all of those things, look at your life. Reflect on where you are. Reflect on what you're doing. Decide what destinations you want to get to. There's some very clear and good ones in Scripture. Talk to some people that you love and respect who share your faith, and talk about that together, and sort of dream together about where you want to wind up individually and frankly as a group, and then figure out the ways to get there in partnership with a God who wants those things more than you do. And then, see, he's into it. Then, find the grit, determination, and integrity to commit yourself to those paths. And stay on them. Share those commitments with some other people so they can walk the path with you, so they can support you in it. And I'm just asking you straight up for one thing. Get one other person or one other family to become a part of this thing that's so important in your life and that's fed into it. If it did it for you, it could do it for them. Stop giving yourself excuses. Stop pointing them to other places. There's something beautiful and true that matters here, and that God means for you to share in other people and invite other people into. I'm not speculating that. He's pretty clear. If it's beautiful, if it's true, if it's good. Are you saying if there are no problems with it? No, man, there's people, there's problems. Matter of fact, there's people in grace and a God who's in the reconciliation business, so it's going to be a bumpy ride sometimes, but it's still beautiful and true. And we're going to keep loving each other, and we're going to keep walking beside each other in those disagreements because we believe that there's something that is more powerful, more beautiful, and more true than the disagreement. We believe that there are things that we have in common that matter more than whatever we're not seeing eye to eye about right now. And we'll keep walking together, even if that means one of us has to slow down. We'll keep walking together, even if that means some of us have to speed up, because we believe that we see God together. Let me rephrase that. We believe that we see God more clearly together. Individually, we make really good ideological idols of God that seem like bigger, better versions of ourselves. In community with other people who come from different backgrounds, who have different perspectives, but who love this Jesus, we see God more clearly. And we're able to hear God more clearly as He calls us forward into His future, into His reality. So as the new year starts, may you find things, now let's say it like this. May you have the courage to look at your life, where it is, where you are, and determine where you need to go from here, what God is calling you to. May you have the courage, integrity, and grit to make commitments about the paths to get there. May you have the courage to share it with other people along the journey so that you can walk together, so that you can walk better, so that you can walk stronger. May you commit yourself to these paths in faith so that you can see a God who makes good on His promises and does things that are beyond our ability. And may you give up on, I had this whole section of the sermon on this, but I'm just going to mention it. May you quit letting the question, isn't it better to be safe, have any sway in your life whatsoever. You are called to faith, not safety. Faith, by nature of the word, is inherently and necessarily risky. It's you saying no to some other things so you can say yes to this thing because it matters and because you bought into it. May you live lives of courageous, engaged faith, like you believe that there is a God who's living and active, who's doing things in the world, and who has made promises that He's going to make good on. May you live faithful lives because you committed to do so. May you believe in each other May you believe in this church enough to pour yourselves into it, to invite other people into it, because it is the body of Christ and you get to be a part of it. God called this group of people together here because He's doing something. Let's get on board. He's got you deployed out into this community in places that I'll never even be, but you are. To bear His image, to carry His message, to share good news, to breathe life and hope into other people. So do that. And if they're a part of a church somewhere and you can encourage them to engage more and be a part of that living body, then do that by all means. If they're not, if they don't have a home, if they don't have their place where they're connected, then invite them back to yours. Because it's beautiful and true and it matters. Building's kind of old. I noticed. We're kind of small. Also noticed. We don't have the resources that some of these other churches have. Yeah. I mean, there's clear things we could do about that, but yeah. Also, we serve a God of grace who shows His strength through people's weaknesses, so why don't you live like you believe that? I mean, if we had great explanations for why everything would probably happen anyway because of our great resources, facilities, and you name it, then you don't need much of a God there, do you? So I guess maybe that's it. I hope you and I take the opportunity to look to evaluate where we are individually as a church. I hope we actually care about some things enough to make goals, to paint targets, to chart paths. And what I'd like for us to do this year is to actually live lives of faith. See what happens. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And the church said together,